Yes, here we go. It is time for the Monday Club. It's been a while. Look, for those missing my silly little face, look at the effort I've went to. I've even worked out, this technophobe that I am, has worked out how to put my strange hairdo and, you know, very, very much 5 out of 10 face onto the screen, just in case you were missing it. See a lot of negative feedback, Jonathan, about, turning his camera off now, as if it's like some sort of crime. People who don't know what they're talking about. But there is only one thing to talk about, and that's Celtic on the Monday Club. And there's lots to get through because Celtic lifted the trophy the weekend, crowned champions obviously within the last 7 days. Scottish Cup final against Rangers, first time in 22 years, or first time ever. Some people might be more partial to describing it as. And I have no issue with either way of describing it, to be honest with you. But it does tell you there's something that happens very rarely, very unoften. Yeah, we're going to do all that good stuff and get stuck in, but there's lots to get through. Thanks to everyone who's on the bus right now. Remember, please do give us a like, give us a share, slag the hair, all that carry on. If you want to become a Bhoycie Bus member, so many of you have. So many have been dished out recently as well by the likes of 420 somewhere and so many more. We really do appreciate it. It just keeps the wheels on the road. Means all the overheads are all covered and stuff like that. But yeah, also go to piesports.com because that still gets you tasty pastry treats right through the summer, perhaps for the Euros, perhaps for the Cup final this week. I can confirm I've worked my way through all 12 that I got the other week, and better than ever, mate. Better than ever. Maybe the only reason I've not got the camera on is because I'm now, I don't know, 25 stone. Maybe that's the reason, Jonathan. I look unrecognisable. Maybe I do. Anyway, but let's get into it. Over to you, mate.
Yeah, it was another good weekend. Got to enjoy trophy lift. There's a good bit of fun, I think would be the right word that Brendan's been using the last couple of weeks. That's been had, over the weekend there with Santa Claus and everything else doing the presentations. We're now, moving towards a massive cup final, and who'd have thought maybe 6, 7, 8 weeks ago we would be on the cusp of a potential double, because I think the mood music, or the story, the narrative, as Brendan Rodgers has been saying so much of late, seemed to have written Celtic off completely. And yet here we are now, already got the main trophy in the bag. Rangers appear to be struggling to find that bit of form now. Celtic seem to have the bit between their teeth. They're going to go in to Hampden, as clear favourites, I would imagine, to win that game now. And you know what? I think we're all feeling a lot more optimistic than where we were 6, 7 weeks ago. And it just goes to show you, when the wheels start turning and we get to the business end of the season, the bottom line is Celtic always seem to find the results. And I fully expect us to do so again on Saturday. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is the time Rangers do get emptied, because for me, there's been a couple of them already this season. Ibrox first half, it could have been a cricket score, should have been a cricket score. Celtic Park, a couple of weeks back, again, very dominant display. And, with so many efforts on goal, I just feel there is a potential there for a right good doing to be dished out. And I just wonder, Russell, if it might fall this Saturday in the Scottish Cup final.
Yeah, it might. It absolutely might. It's one of those things, though. I don't like to be too smart arsey on the bus, Jonathan, but I'm going to take my prediction and put it out there from a few weeks ago. And that was, I predicted the 8-point lead exactly would be restored by the end of the season. And lo and behold, I didn't even need to check the Hearts score. Let's be honest, on Saturday, I didn't even check the Celtic score. I was gone. It was a weekend of fun for Bhoycie. I was with a big sponsor night out on the Friday. Connor had to step in and do the pause because Terry messaged me, I think, about 5-3, saying we got on for 3 sharp. I didn't even know it was Saturday. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? I didn't know it was Saturday, I didn't know the score. I was like, I'm still partying for last night, mate. But yeah, fucking nice one. Yeah, so with regards to predictions, though, I did expect us to finish Saturday afternoon a good number of weeks ago, that we would be 8 points ahead by the end, and that 8-point lead restored. And I wait for Brendan to say Problem? What problem? The lead that you give me absolute pelters for, I restored for you come the end of the season, and all finished exactly as he would have wanted. Exactly as I say, as I had a feeling it might. And I don't mean that in a big smart ass way. It was just something I just had a gut feeling about a good few weeks ago, and I'm delighted that we managed to get that done. With regards to performance levels, I think that's the most intriguing thing for the cup final, because I don't just think it's been getting the points on the board. Obviously, that was first and foremost the most important task. But the honest truth is, I think it's been the level of performance has went beyond what I think a lot of us thought this maybe Celtic team was capable of this year. Mainstays have came back. That undoubtedly was helping. Maybe an angle Brendan, see with hindsight, deserves a hell of a lot of fucking credit for not pushing on, and in terms of his post-match comments when results weren't great. I don't remember him angling towards Kamikata because he's been missing. Hatate's been missing. I don't remember him using that as an excuse offering. I think other managers would do that. And based on the impact these guys had, he would have had every right to. And most managers are in there to protect their own skin at all times, because such is management these days in football, not just Celtic. You only have sort of 3-4 games it feels away from, being on the chopping block. And I think Brendan deserves kudos for the fact he never resorted to that, when you consider the impact that guys like that actually had. But yeah, talk to me about what you feel in terms of performance levels. I know Saturday, I've only watched the highlights, to be honest with you. I know it obviously wasn't maybe falling into that narrative. But up to winning that trophy, undeniably, I feel they are looking more what I expected a hell of a lot earlier this season. That gives me a lot of confidence going into the weekend as well.
Yeah, I think when we're looking at it, you can probably put the game at the weekend into isolation a little bit, because there was a lot of fringe players that were given minutes to keep the big hitters wrapped up in cotton wool. Dare I say, a few of them maybe had a few sore heads from the partying that they were rightly indulging themselves in during the week. But when you're looking at the performance levels, it's all kind of clicked together, and it is a common theme with Celtic, is when it gets to this stage of the season, it's when we come alive, I think was the words Brendan used just a couple of weeks ago. And, he was proven right once again. And he does deserve an awful lot of credit, Brendan, for how he's managed to handle this season. I would say it's by far and away been his toughest season as a Celtic manager. He's been faced with all sorts of negativity from pretty much every angle imaginable. He's had no real backing from the board in terms of getting his own players in. He's had to put up with a lot of things going on off the field with the supporters, Green Brigade being banned for spells, a lot of fans not wanting him back to begin with, results taking that negative turn around Christmas in the build to Christmas time, allowing Rangers to close that gap in. And then obviously the media, anytime there was a poor result or a poor performance, are beginning to bang all of these drums simultaneously. And I think for Brendan, this has probably been his most satisfactory league title win, because I think from his point of view, he's looked at it and felt a bit insulted by how the narrative has gone all season. But when you're touching on performances, I think what we have seen is Brendan doing what Brendan does best and get the best out of his players towards the business end of the season when he needed them to come good. He's had it's been an interesting season on that front, because you look at it, Celtic started extremely strong, even if it wasn't necessarily performance-wise, but they won or were unbeaten, in about their first, it was probably the first round of fixtures. They didn't lose a game because we had that comfortable cushion, and that was on merit as well, despite what was going on at Ibrox at that point. Celtic were very strong results-wise at the start of the season, and again, to finish, they actually got even stronger towards the end of the season. So that's no accident that Brendan's managed to orchestrate that within the team. Yeah, having guys like, Carter Vickers, Rio Hatate, etc. back only helps. Matters, Maeda, making a miraculous recovery from that hamstring injury we thought he had is another huge one for us. But when I look at it, the players that really came back into form, you look at somebody like Matt O'Reilly, for example, who's again playing his best football of the season right at the business end after having that little lull earlier on in the season. He's managed to pick up his form. obviously having.
How long was that lull, though, Jonathan? I don't want to, cut you off mid-stride there, but sometimes it's easy to forget some of the comments that get made when it's longer that whoever it is behind the mic's talking. And I'm interjecting on because I just think it's an interesting one for me. One that won't stand the test of time. How bad was this dip? Where did this form really slump to? How many games did it slump for, if it did at all? And to what levels and to what cost? I think it's called being held to a different standard, and I think that's so important to factor into it. When you've been playing the best football of your career, and individually being the best performer of the Celtic team, naturally, when there's a 7 out of 10 in there, it looks like a 5 out of 10 performance. That's what I think he was guilty of. I didn't see this slump. I think it's almost wrong to be describing it as that. I think dip in form, it's a dip in form from an extremely high level. Not so much a standard level of form dipping, if that makes any sense. And that's maybe where my frustration is. I think with O'Reilly, he has been extremely consistent this year. I'm never really below a 7 out of 10. Regularly 8 or 9 out of 10 either side of a couple of 7 out of 10. But I put it back to you. How long was said slump that you speak of for? What levels did he drop to, and how costly was it?
I think when we're looking at the sort of narrative around the slump, I think you're looking at January, and obviously it's when the interest comes in from Atletico Madrid, and I think he's even said himself that his head was slightly turned by that, and he did have a little drop off. I wouldn't say it was, he's been far and away our best player all season, even when he's had these patches where he hasn't been at his all singing, all dancing best. But you've got to look at it in these sort of moments and think, if there was other players that were able to kind of step up to the mark, it would have probably meant O'Reilly's dip wouldn't have been factored in as much as it was. But we were pretty much in a position that nobody else was really stepping up when O'Reilly falls back slightly in performance levels. And that's naturally going to happen. You can't expect any player to go through a full season without having moments where things don't quite go their way and having a run of games where things don't quite work out the way that you want them to for them. And that's when you're really relying on others stepping up. And I think potentially perhaps when O'Reilly's form has dropped off, there wasn't as much happening from the other players around him to kind of cover that a little bit more. And as you say, you might be right. He may well have been playing, a pretty decent level, but because of the fact we were so reliant and dependent on him, everything was, then under a microscope when it came to Matt O'Reilly for the fans. And that's perhaps why we were feeling a bit dejected and disappointed when we weren't getting the same levels of performance we got out of him at the start of the season. And then, indeed, what we did get him at the end is quite unbelievable. When you're looking at somebody like Matt O'Reilly as well, Russell, I find it hard to imagine whether he'll be at Celtic, next season on the back of these types of performances. I think I'd seen there was interest from Brighton, but I don't know how legitimate that is. But for me, there's going to be a lot of people swarming around him, and if he has a good performance again on Saturday, which he's more than capable of, do you reckon we'll be able to even keep hold of him for another season, or do you think that might be his swan song?
Capable of holding on to him, yes. I instantly jump out of that argument because I hate that. I've seen a few narratives like that as well, that Celtic won't be able to hold on to him. Celtic can hold on to him. He's contracted to Celtic, and people need to pay whatever Celtic think he's worth. My worry is Celtic, what they think he's worth, will be lower than what I think you can actually get from him in today's crazy inflated current market that we still don't quite manage to get ourselves to grips with, and still seem to blink the second anything like 25 million comes in. When 25 million, I remember being a crazy sort of fee you were seeing. Well, not crazy, but it seemed like an extremely high fee and one that you couldn't turn down as far back as, I don't know, 2009. I remember Adebayor, I think he was at 25 million. I remember that was the last time I really thought in English terms. And it's English clubs we're talking about here, so that's why I'm talking about Adebayor, right, for as an example. I think that £25 million, and you thought, fucking hell, that's one of the best, that's a lot of money. Since then, 25 million's nothing there. You want me to give you other examples? I look at Wan-Bissaka 6 years ago, something like that, 5 years ago. 6 years ago, John, Manchester United for Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace have been in the league only a few years. He's at 19, 20, and they paid 50 million right off the bat. This guy is man of the matches in the Champions League. 18 goals, 18 assists in all competitions this season for Celtic. Was the highest in terms of all stats in English football, albeit playing in League One. But in all the leagues combined, he still had the best stats out there before he came to Celtic. So he'll be high on radars anyway. So when he does something of note, something or spells a form of note, I think he's a player that jumps back up to the top of the list because he's been a person of interest on many clubs scouting targets for a longer period of time. Celtic also have to remind potential buyers of the strength they have. Their accounts are public information. Everyone knows what Celtic have in the bank. The Champions League prize money, the TV money regarding that, it's public information. The other clubs need to be reminded of that. This is where we're at. We don't need to sell. This is how long he's got left in his contract. We don't need to sell. Then it's up to Matt O'Reilly to kick off if he wants to go. I've said this before. I don't see him kicking off to leave Celtic. I think it's something he will certainly, if offered by the likes of a Tottenham, something like that, say, look, it would be good if I could speak to them. I think they would have an adult conversation about that. And Celtic would say, yeah, that's fine. Thank you, though, for signing that, the deal that you're currently on. Because of that, though, we're going to ask them for this fee before they can do so. But we're not stopping you from speaking to them. It's actually them who don't want you enough unless they match that fee. And in the going rate, Celtic should be able to pluck up, I would say, around 100 examples of a fee greater than £30 million that's been bandied about in the Premier League and say, you won't even be in. I don't know how many fees, maybe there's only 50 over 30 million, I don't know. But however many there are and say, there's been that many above you, mate. Don't kid on you being that highly sought after. I just think with his nature, I think since he came to Celtic, he's always, the way he spoke about it, appreciated where he's at. And I think loves it, to be honest with you as well. Do I think he wants a move? Not necessarily. Do I think he would love to explore options if they're more attractive? Yes. That's modern football. But I'm very relaxed about that one in terms of if it were me, you charge everything you can. And is that your flatmate just came in?
Yeah, exactly.
It's all good. But yeah, I just think if I were in the Celtic board, I would be going, let's talk about a real fee. We've got too much at stake. We have absolutely too much. It's not too much at stake. Too much in the kitty here already, thanks to our successes on the field this year. And we've got either that we won't spend either. It almost ramps the pressure on them as well from another point of view. You add another 30 million to whatever this 40, 50 million is, Champions League money, season tickets, etc., etc. And you start looking at Celtic being absolutely cornered into, well, what the fuck are you doing with this money? And only one is that payout for the compensation. I don't want to brush over it in an ignorant way. I know I'm going for tangents here, but obviously that's something we think could be a substantial, payout in cash. But once that's done, I mean, the board would look almost exposed in terms of, well, what the fuck are you doing? I already think they're in that situation. But for me, it should be Celtic not doing what they did with Jota, absolutely taking stock of where they think the market value is, and that would mean rejecting any offer that matches the sort of Jota one. Seeing who else is interested, garner interest, build it. Don't kid on. You took the early money because you wanted as much time as possible to get an adequate replacement, and because that's not what you do. But in terms of the selling point of view, I think I would be relaxed about it. For me, I look at players going Jonathan for far, far more money than 25 million. So I think O'Reilly's, he's only worth what someone's willing to pay for him. But if you put him in another league, he's 50 million plus. In the Scottish one, We've done 25 million a couple of times now. It's time to push on. And if I was Celtic, I would be holding out for 35 million pounds. Then start maybe saying, Matt, go have a wee chat with them if you so wish.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one to kind of look at when it comes to Matt O'Reilly, and they certainly need to be asking the question. I think when it comes to something like that as well, when you have a guy like Brendan Rodgers, back in the building, who knows the English markets ever so well, he's acutely aware, to coin a phrase that you use often, of how much players go for, because he's had his fingers burned trying to do it with Leicester, and Liverpool in the past. You've got to be willing to pay premium rates, and you're not necessarily always getting premium players when you're paying those types of rates. But somebody like a Matt O'Reilly could absolutely cut it in the English Premiership, and it's up to Celtic to be making sure they're getting the exact amount of money that they need to be getting for him. And when you're looking at it, what was it? Tierney was about 25 million, and I would imagine that when you add on a bit more time onto that with inflation and everything else, you could absolutely be asking for 30 for somebody like a Matt O'Reilly, if an English club is interested. If you ask the question, it sounds a lot of money in Scottish football terms, but in the English markets, it's peanuts. It's absolutely peanuts. There's very little money involved there for £30 million. That's like Celtic going and buying somebody for £3 million, really, is what that's like.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Yep.
For a lot of the English clubs. So I don't necessarily see that as us asking for too much there. And I think sometimes we do get caught up in that mentality of thinking we can't ask for too much, or they're just going to walk away from our players. Well, let them walk if that's going to be the case. Let them walk. Somebody will pay this type of money for players like a Matt O'Reilly, because he's proven himself, as you rightly say, in Europe. He is still a young player. He won, Young Player of the Year. I was surprised when I'd seen that in the Celtic Awards the other week there, because I didn't think he was still young enough to be in that category, but he is. So he's still got, far and away the best years in front of him. And there's no real reason why an English club should pay that sort of money. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
The Celtic Player of the Year, who won Player of the Year?
He won that as well.
He won Player. That's why I thought you were wrong there. So I knew he won Player. He won Player and Young Player of the Year.
Yeah, he won them. He won them both.
That's strange for a club to do that within their own awards.
Well, I think it was the players voted for one of them, so I don't think it was necessarily all by the club. That ended up panning out that way. I think the players voted for him Player of the Year, and I'm not sure who voted on the Young Player one, but he ended up with both of them.
No, that's interesting. But yeah, Matt O'Reilly's someone to me who's the epitome of what good business is. But again, just because I've always got my eye on the board, mate, I think he was, yes, identified by Celtic, but he was identified by about 40 different clubs as well. The reality is, Riley McGree would have been a Celtic player had they been willing to spend, again, very realistic money on him and match the wages that Middles were paid. I mean, I know it was all celebrated that he joined Middles, but I'm going to guess that the 25 to 30 grand a week they offered Riley McGree was more than Celtic were willing to go to for their number one target. But Lady Luck's landed in the lap with him. But I wish him all the best anyway, whatever it is he does. But we need him on the form he's currently on for Saturday, and that's the most important thing. The rest of the chat can absolutely wait. We look ahead to Saturday, and it's so important that when I joke about, I'm not joking, 8-point gap again over Rangers actually ends up, I think, a point of more of a gap than it was when Clermont took over. So even his Clermont title's gone. He looks like a fanny for peddling that the whole time. The last 4 or 5 weeks when his team's been in shit form. He's actually made a bit of a fool of himself because he's not even managed to get his own made-up title over the line. We've took that off him before. It's his first ever crowning, and it's Celtic who won his own title as well that he made up. So that must hurt. Where do you think they're at going into this game?
They are not in a good place, I don't feel, at the moment, Rangers. I think the penny might already be beginning to drop with Clermont, that he is not onto a good thing at Ibrox, and certainly not as good a thing as he might have thought when he first went in. It's all fine and dandy when things are going well, but it's eerily similar to what was happening when Michael Beale went in there to begin with, in terms of what's happening on the pitch Granted, I think Clement's not quite as bad on the microphone, although he's certainly been a bit more bizarre of late. But when you look at what happened when Beale came in, I think he had a very similar narrative to begin with around him as to how many points he'd picked up compared to Celtic, and kind of sweep what had happened under the previous regime as well. And that does seem to be the kind of cycle we go through at the last few years when it comes to Rangers, as Celtic get themselves too far in front at the start of a season. Rangers sack a manager. The Rangers manager that comes in starts pulling things back a little bit, and then Celtic, when it gets to the business end, pull away, and then we go back through the same cycle again the next year. I think for Rangers, they've got to look at it and think this has got to be the last time a lot of these players play together in a cup final. I think the manager's been open and honest enough to say that team needs a full revamp. Whether or not they can afford that will be another question that is for another day, I suppose. But looking at these players, they've consistently proven for Rangers that they're nowhere near good enough over the period. And, as long as Celtic turn up, as far as I'm concerned, I struggle to see anything other than a Celtic win there. And I just don't even think Rangers enjoy playing Celtic in the same way that we enjoy playing them. I mean, look at the results this season, Russ. We probably should have whitewashed them, really. We draw with them at Ibrox, and that was our own fault. We get ourselves 2-0 up and don't manage the game out. We then get ourselves 3-2 up with only a few minutes left, and we still don't manage the game out. We could have been sitting with 4 wins out of 4 against them quite comfortably. And there's been a lot of convincing performances in there, even when the results have been relatively close too. And I just think this time, with Celtic now being at full strength, the fans, and the manager back reconnected, more than they've ever been this season, it's got all the makings of being a very memorable day on Saturday. But if I'm looking at it, and I don't know how you feel about it, are the Rangers fans even, going to be as up for this as the players? Are the players going to be able to find that extra gear this time? Because for me, Rangers just look like a club that have a bit of fear when it comes to Celtic, if I'm being brutally honest.
Well, it is a bit like that, you're right. I just don't know, when it comes to the rivalry, how realistic it is all the time during the season that we feel. I feel like we almost can't win. I'm getting my words mixed up here. I think when they're doing half decent, right? We're doing half decent, they get described as under par, under strength, an embarrassment at Rangers jersey. They have one good season when there's no fans. I watched open goal tonight. I like watching the open goal once a week. I really do. You're going to I get you tickets for that for your Christmas. You're going there on Friday, aren't you?
Yeah.
You'll be looking forward to that. They're good. But they started listing players that Rangers got rid of the year before. Now, having watched it most weeks over the years, I know they were advocating them to leave. It was their time to go. Now it's, they're a lot better than what they've got at the door at the present. Now, that being said, it's almost like the second Celtic do well, the Rangers team gets worse. And when Rangers do well, they were all shit hot. And Celtic, for whatever reason, just couldn't keep up with the might of Rangers. I just think sometimes you need to give kudos to Celtic. I think that's as tight a challenge we've been in, and we've overcame it. What I think's the interesting thing is, if it's going to be now described as rebuild City all over again across the road, rebuild one more time, the same as it is every other summer. When does Celtic start getting the credit then for building, if you like, or deconstructing every Rangers team that stands before them? When do they start getting the credit for Celtic must have done a few things okay? A few things okay this year to have ended up needing this all-conquering at one point, Clement revolution, to need to rebuild again within weeks. I just think we're in a territory where I like to judge Celtic on Celtic things. Celtic, to me, have all the tools to win the league year on year, and if they're not doing that, then the strength of the opposition better be shit hot. I thought this year Rangers at times looked very resilient when Clement came in. Not under Mickey, Mickey nearly threw the whole thing away in a matter of a few weeks. He's a bluffer. Celtic do deserve credit for coming back into it and then taking charge when it matters, and I like that. But Celtic as a whole have European football to consider, and that's the bar that I want us to start being judged on. I'll be consistent in banging that drum. What's really frustrating me though is I also think when you just strip away that bigger picture and you look at the domestic success that's so far occurred, and that is over 38 games, being 8 points clear of your rivals, it's so important to go, what about what Celtic did to do that? And not about Rangers rebuild. What about Celtic being better than this opposition that's been heralded this year? Brendan Rodgers not the manager of the year. Philip Clement is in the running for it, or was in the running for it. I know he didn't get it either. It's fucking laughable. When do we get to the stage where when Celtic beat a Rangers side, it doesn't flip? I think Celtic fans are guilty of looking back now to perhaps Rodgers' first season as an example, first spell, and saying, terrible. They were a terrible Rangers team. It didn't feel like that at the time. There's revisionism on it. When they signed guys like Nico Kranjčar, 31 years old, I mean, he had over 100 caps for Croatia at that point. Playing midfield with Modric, over 50 of them. Joey Barton came in at 32. Whether you like him, whether he became a parody or not, that's because of his own stupid mouth. He was still a good player. Philip Sendros was part of the Arsenal Invincibles, I'm sure. Like, this is crazy. Or maybe a sub back then. He was maybe a bit too young. But he's part of some good fucking Arsenal teams anyway. If not in that Invincibles squad, maybe just a wee bit early. There was loads of examples of like what looked like strengthening, and because Celtic do well, then gets slaughtered and described as the worst Rangers team ever. And I just feel sometimes looking at the narratives or listening to the narratives, I should say, that suddenly it's all how shit Rangers are. Well, it never felt like that this season. Let's just look at the most recent season as a example. What do you think? Because it seems to me like I'm not going to let this now fester away into 2028 on the Monday Club. Talk about how shite Rangers were in the 23-24 season where, no, that's not how it's felt this campaign. It's felt as if we were up against competition. It felt like we were in a bit of a title race, and it felt like the media still thought that Rangers team was shit hot. The same way they did in 16-17. The same way they did every other season in between.
Yeah, it's one of those ones. I think when you look at, Rangers, they've definitely been better than sometimes we like to say. It wasn't that long ago they were in a European final. You only have to look at their European results to have a bit of an inclination that they are better than we sometimes think they are. And that doesn't just mean that once Celtic dispose of them, that means they're all rubbish all of a sudden, because they'll no doubt, again, next season, do something in Europe. They do seem to have a knack for producing big results in those competitions, which tells you there's something about that team for a start. You're looking at how well they've done domestically. They've picked up a very high points total. They've forced Celtic's hand. Celtic have ended up winning this league by 8 points, and they've ended up finishing with just 1 point better than what it was under Ange Postecoglou in the first season around. So it's not exactly been, as much of a procession as it sometimes is, albeit the points difference is there at the end of the season. And you've got to look at it and think, Rangers have ran us close this time. There was moments this season where there was a bit of self-doubt creeping in amongst the support. And you can't just then turn around and say, well, Celtic have managed to win it again, and because we always find ways to do it at this end of the season, that means that we don't deserve any credit for taking apart, what is a decent Rangers side. But if you're looking at it from the media, it just won't happen. It's an endless cycle of bigging Rangers up as much as they possibly can until they realise they're not going to be able to win the league title, and then they go into, well, they're going to be back next year, and they'll start banging the drum about they'll be better and stronger next season once they've done their rebuilding. There's various examples of that over the last few summers as a minimum, just to give some context there. And that feels like that's going to always continue to be the case. But I think from what I've seen from Brendan Rodgers, I'm not sure that'll bother him that much, Russell. I think he quite likes it with the way the narratives have been. You know, I don't know if you'd seen it. He'd said he'd seen the newspaper clippings throughout the season, and he'd actually presented them to the team throughout the season, dating right back, I think, to the 26th of August, which was the day we drew 0-0 at home to St Johnstone, and there was the first bit of negativity coming out in the press. And I think Brendan Rodgers is quite good at managing those sort of narratives, if you like, with his players. And it certainly worked for him this year in terms of building that siege mentality. And I don't know. I mean, we probably won't see a day where the media turn around and start giving Celtic, you know, a load of credit for Rangers going through these supposed rebuilds every summer. But do you not think in some ways as well, with a guy like Brendan Rodgers, it maybe helps him do his job a little bit, having that extra fuel there? It keeps him motivated when he's seeing these headlines and he just wants to get one over on them even more, because he even said this year he feels like he's been personally attacked with some of the media narratives that have been going on. And I actually think that makes Brendan Rodgers a more dangerous manager when this is happening in the background with the news.
Yeah, but this is always the thing, isn't it? The background narratives, Jonathan. We write our own stories, as they say. We write our own stories, and that's been the message that Brendan's set. How do you think he's played the media this campaign? Because I think he's laid traps at times. I think some are inadvertent that he's then capitalised on. And I appreciate that. I think that's one of the reasons he was brought back. I also think he was able to strip the emotion away. Unlike Clement. Clement looked like he was this ice cold, almost Alexander Usyk-esque, you could say, Jonathan, type of character who didn't seem to give much away. Strictly business and here to do a job. And I actually thought that composure that he showed there initially had some substance. That's what I felt. You soon realise it's all bullshit. It's all fucking nonsense. And when he starts chest pumping, fist pumping, round the stadium, Tour de France, round Ibrox, because they got a 3-3 draw in the game they had to win, you realised he's been ate up and spat out by whatever that job does to people as well, because he's not the only one it's happened to, and he might regain composure and who the hell he is in a few years after he's left. I just feel that side of it, though, led to narratives that Brendan thought, do you know what? I'm going to remove emotion from this title running. I want to make calls. I think he did it with his team selections. And I think he built the siege mentality thing that was important. He twisted what was getting used against him into a Celtic favour, if you like, which I thought garnered him support, which was good because he needed it all. And I just wonder if the rocky road was this year for Brendan and he's walked it. I think Scottish Cup does take on more importance as well, though. I think the narrative, as he's alluded to, could still get a hell of a lot more negative if we don't win it. I think they'll be looking for it. I think they'll be looking for it. So, with that in mind, the cup final does take on a greater significance, but it always has a great one anyway. As Marc always says, you associate the Scottish Cup with Celtic. I think they're not just going to win the most. I just think the green and white and the summer sun, that's the gold. You know, the green and white hoops and the gold is the sunshine. And that's how Scottish Cup final day is meant to look, in my opinion. And Celtic celebrating it at the end. With regards to all of that, though, I just wonder if we are to get over the line. We're both confident that we will. You can't help but feel it's going to be an easier road for Brendan going forward. That's regardless of what Rangers do. You know, I'm sure we'll get told, come fucking September that the window was a far stronger one for Rangers. No matter if Celtic saying fucking messy, it'll be Rangers are a better window. Celtic have spunt money, etc., etc. But I do think the road should be more smooth for Brendan no matter what next year. I wouldn't be surprised next year. How about this? If Celtic don't win as many points as 93, but win the league, win more points in the Champions League, and potentially still win a treble. But they might win less points in that league. 93, mate, is probably in the top 5 or 6 points totals of the last 20 years. People don't hear that. Doesn't fit. Doesn't suit. It's joint with Angie's first season. It's 4 points off Angie's second season, I think. It's Rodgers' second best out of his 3 that he's seen out. It's better than Lenny's one. If I think it's better than any Lenny got. It's interesting how narratives change when facts get in the way. I just wonder if all that stuff will lead to a smoother year now for Rodgers ahead, because the less of the narrative now, I think this time next season, or not this time next season, the beginning of next season, Jonathan, the narrative won't be as negatively laid by Celtic fans in equal measure as it is Rangers fans. I think the heat was on this year. Every defeat was over-exaggerated by us as much as them. And this time around, having won the league, particularly if we go get the double, I do feel that Rodgers will have a smoother path.
I think that's an interesting one, because I think a lot of that is going to depend what happens in the summer. I have no doubt about it. It'll definitely. I think people's expectations maybe won't be as high this summer going into a window as perhaps they were last year when Rodgers came back in. We've seen that as a sign of intent, and we expected Celtic to kick on and really deliver the same sort of players to match the calibre of manager they went for. I hope the board have been watching and paying attention this season, because it hasn't been an easy one, and this could have very easily spiralled out of control at times. And I put that all on Brendan and the fact that this didn't, because I think, a different manager put in these sort of circumstances, there was a whole heap of things to try and keep us united and together, where this could have totally unravelled, and we could have ended up way behind in this league title race at one stage or another. So I think, hats off to him for that, but it's up to the board really to back him. Obviously, if we don't capitalise on getting this additional Champions League money, it's worth even more than ever before with the extra games you're going to get next season. I think there'll be a lot more eyes on the board than just yours this time around, Russell. I think there will be quite a lot of people interested to see what happens at Celtic Park this summer, because I think there is an acceptance there that there is players that we do need to upgrade on. We're obviously definitely going to need a new first choice goalkeeper with Joe Hart retiring now, so that becomes an immediate one. I think Brendan's obviously done his bit by seeing things through. At times, a very weak squad in some games he's had to go into, especially games against Rangers, your biggest rivals. He went to Ibrox in the first game, and that team was very unfancied with who he had available to win that one, and he found a way to do it. So I think the board have got to now throw their weight behind him after what he's done for the club. But touching back on the cup final, I think when you're looking at that, I think Brendan Rodgers goes into that in a very good place. You're right to mention the sort of advantages he's taken of the media twists they've put on some of his words. I think some of them definitely were a bit more deliberate. I think the having fun one, as much as he tried to play that down, I think he knew what he was doing with that one. But I do take your point. I think other ones, like the good girl one, fell in his lap.
So do you think the first one, just to be clear, you thought that was cast in the net?
I think he was trying his arm a little bit with that. I think he knew what he was doing a little bit with that. And obviously he could then turn around and be all innocent Brendan when it gets towards, the actual...
Does that stem? Does it stem, though, from things like I was touching on there, come on, but, almost, how would you describe it, like dropping his guard first?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Clement's reaction after drawing with us was such that Rodgers says the next time we play them it's going to be fun. But it's because you've shown your emotions, mate. You've blinked first. And Rodgers sees that as weakness. And then goes, I've seen the weakness. You drop your guard. I'll go in for the kill. And that's what I think he's done there. I think it's based, come on, ice cold face remains, walks his team up the tunnel, says he's frustrated they only drew, yada, yada, yada. We knew to, all that sort of stuff. Very different. Instead, he called it a moral victory. He does a lap of honour. He fist pumps. He garners the support. Fans, for some reason, mimicked it, mirrored it as he was doing it. And all Rodgers does, because he is this guy psychologically who just thinks of all these things, he looks at all and goes, I smell weakness. And that is the reality. And therefore, he had his next move. And his next move was to wind him up. Come on. Again, just to remind people, says he would never speak about a game like that. Then, before it, in his next interview, an hour later, whatever, says he will talk about it. We're going to have fun as well. After his match, post, they had a game. So pre-match to that, it was the game leading up to the derby. And the game before the game, he said he would never speak about an opponent like that. After the game, he says, "Yeah, we look forward to the derby now. We're going to have fun as well." And it's like, fucking hell. It worked. It was brilliant, though, because the psychological warfare that goes on can't be underestimated. It is an important part of it. And I'm backing Rodgers every day with that. Interestingly, I want your take on this before we go. There was a comment by Pam earlier in the chat. Now, I don't want to side with Pam because she's recently joined the bus. So I'll be honest. I'm not sure if Ange could have given us the results that Brendan Rodgers did, given the obstacles presented this season. I know why Pam's saying that. I'll tell you why Pam's saying that. Ange was on a free hit at the start of his reign, right? He knew how bad it was. So he could be gals to say, "Oh, you caught weak titles early here." I think Ange this year, say this was his year 3, and the way the narratives are spun, the obstacles that have been laid by a better Rangers once came in, fans banned from the ground, albeit I think he had a spell at that as well, didn't he? Because we were there, one of the games. Oh, no, the fans who did the sponsored silence.
They did the silence. There was a few the fans, so,
there was a fan another week. Yeah, there was. We were at that game as well. There was one when they weren't there. I don't know. I think when I look at Ange in front of the media, when he had his 4 defeats, 5 defeats in a row at Spurs, I'm not that we've had that, but I didn't like what I seen there. And that reminded me of the guy who was in charge of Australia, who was arguing with Australia under 21s, I think it was at the time. And he's done the split screen that was heralded by Celtic fans as how to take control of the media. I thought it was the polar opposite. I'm not sure he'd have dealt with it as well as Rodgers has. I think he'd have got more petty than Rodgers has, put it that way, to say the least. And I think it's a fair point by Pam. Many will disagree. I don't. I'm not convinced he'd have got those results. I think he'd have dragged it into the gutter in terms. I don't mean the gutter as much as that might sound like really negative. But I think he'd have dragged the debate down to be all about bickers with the media. Bickers that sound great when you're on top. When he said to Kenny McIntyre, you sounded like you, they only sound like you didn't enjoy the result, mate, or something like that. That's all fair when the going's going well. That sort of thing getting flipped when it's negative stuff and it's now nippy when you're biting back might not go down as well. I don't know. What do you think of that? I think we had the right guy in charge for what this season was. We were presented with.
Yeah, Brendan Rodgers knows how to manage the media, and he knows better than anyone how the Glasgow Goldfish Bowl works. I think even though he must have been a bit surprised, and I think he's alluded to it since the season's finished, as to just how much negativity he faced. And I think he's pretty much on the record saying it's been one of the most challenging seasons he's had as a football manager when he considers all the different stories that he's had to try and deal with throughout the season. From recruitment to playing to the players to the fans and everything else in between. So he's managed it expertly. And as I said earlier, I think the main reason why we've ended up getting out of here with the title is a large part down to Brendan Rodgers, because this would have been very easy to unravel. There were so many opportunities throughout the season when that negativity was at its peak for things to fall and the results to be impacted. And it never really happened that much. We had, back-to-back defeats around the start of December. And, since then, we never really, whilst we'd had a few draws and everything else, we never really had a sustained period of poor results. It was mainly those 2 results that switched it around a little bit. If you're looking at somebody like Ange Postecoglou being in charge, I think Ange Postecoglou is certainly a lot more blunt than Brendan is. I think Brendan can be quite clever with what he says to still get his point across, but not in a way that comes across as if he's being overly negative towards the media. Whereas I think Ange Postecoglou would have definitely been a lot more on the front foot with that, which might not necessarily have been the best move if the players are already struggling a little bit for performance and the club's a bit disjointed all over each department. So I do think there is certainly an element of that Brendan, man management wise, is absolutely the guy you want in a situation like that, because he's calmness personified. Russell, he's not one who tends to get overly emotional very often. I think this season was actually the first time he's ever been sent off as a manager, potentially, when it happened in the Hearts game, or sorry, when he got the ban afterwards for coming out with the criticism of John Beaton.
Me, Jonathan, checking my imaginary notes for when Brendan Rodgers was sent off.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's not really the type, though, to get too emotionally invested. When decisions don't go his way, whether it's refereeing or whether there's other things at play that could be pissing him off in the background, he always makes sure he keeps a very good poker face in front of the media, and you never know exactly how he's feeling inside until he tells you. And I think that was exactly what we needed this year. I mean, when we're looking at Brendan going into the weekend, though, Russell, we've obviously been talking about these mind games he's been playing. Does he have one last mind game left that he's going to play, this week? Is he going to try for another bite out of Clement, or is he going to try and play this one straight? I know he's been kind of talking a lot the last few days about how Celtic have, written their own stories this season. He's been having a bit of a gloat at the media's expense in terms of all the negativity coming back to bite them on the arse. But I just wonder if he's got one last line to try and reel him in one more time to try and throw him off. And it wouldn't surprise me if he does.
That's a good point. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Would not surprise me in the slightest if Rodgers has one more mind trick. He probably feels it's easy pickings now. Last topic, Jonathan, last one before we go. And it's a short and brief one. If it is the first cup final since in 22 years, I know many will say it's not. It's the first ever. That's fine. No issues. I'm not going down that road. Can't be asked discussing it. I generally don't care what way it's described as. I'm 36 years old. I don't give a fuck, right? When I look at the 2002 Cup final, it's astonishing to think that whatever version of Rangers or entity of Rangers or same Rangers, whatever it fucking is, played Celtic in a Scottish Cup finals 22 years ago, considering how much we think draws are fixed and hot balls are used to ensure they stay for the showpiece and the TV companies make more money. It's generational. I talk about this a lot on the channel, and I think it's really rung home maybe this last season how much of a generational difference there is between even the likes of myself, who I don't consider particularly old in my mid-30s. I'm sure you don't consider yourself old in your early 30s. And yet, success and even a match like this, not known by so many as to what it feels like. I could cast my mind back. I was 14 years old at the time. I had just shaved my head for the first ever time. Ironically, I had four mates round, I think, for high school. Mum got us pies and that for the butchers. We all wish she would offer us an alcoholic drink, but we were a bit too young. But I remember watching it, and Livingston's got the double. They won 3-2, last minute of the game. I went upstairs and was physically sick. I'll never forget how much I felt like I went through the ringer that day. It was such a nerve-jangling experience. It matters so much more in the League Cup. I don't care what anyone says. It takes you to a different place, if my memory serves me right. And it's amazing, I think, from 14 to 36, I've never experienced one. That's wild. And I think it's a big game. I think it's a big fucking game. In the context of this season, and for Rodgers' future, it's massive. But for me, there's a bit of revenge required as well. I need to get that one out of the system. I don't like that being something on my Celtic supporting CV. I don't know. 2 Scottish Cup finals I think I've seen between Celtic and Rangers. Rod Wallace 1-0. And have I ever seen Celtic win a Scottish Cup final against Rangers? There you go. That's a mental at 36. They've never seen Celtic beat. I just want that out that now. So see, for me, There's a lot riding on it as well. It's a bit of revenge on a personal level, and I don't mind having that. I think that's important. But yeah, for those who haven't watched it, those younger ones listening tonight, the game will grab you. It will be massive. Jim C says 1989. So had there been one, I'm not counting that one, Jim. Just because, as good as my memory is, I definitely can't remember that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're looking at it, the fact they haven't played them in such a long time at Hampden in the Scottish Cup final is quite unbelievable when you look at it, even considering Rangers' demise in 2012 and they've had to wait this long to do this dance again. And for me, you look at it and it's really a trophy that is synonymous with Celtic. I mean, if there's one trophy in Scottish football that we always seem to have our paws on, it is the Scottish Cup. It's our final. It's the one that we enjoy the most. It's the showpiece game of the season. It's the one that is the grand finale. Everyone wants to be in it to bring the curtain down on the season. And you've got the two biggest clubs going at it in it this year around. And make no mistake about it, you're going to want to win it massively. The League Cup's always a nice one to win, but everybody knows it's just really there to make up part of your treble. Really, the League Cup, winning it on its own, it's fine for the day. But the Scottish Cup's always one you can kind of hold on to for a bit more. It's the ones where the memories are really a lot more focused in your brain for a lot longer. And obviously, it gives you the bragging rights over the summer, Russell, because you're right. You look at this game, and let's say Rangers do manage to upset us on the day. We already know then what the narrative's going to be till August. That is literally going to be their springboard towards bigger and better things next season. You can already see the newspaper headlines now without even having to look at it. The question marks will once again be asked about Brendan Rodgers, because the narrative will then be Rangers won 2 trophies this season and Celtic only won 1. And Brendan has lost his touch. And that is how it would get played out, regardless of how well Celtic have done in the league. But the flip side of that is we've got a chance here to really lay down a marker, because if we win the Scottish Cup and manage to come away with a cup double, there's very little room for any narrative to be other than this has been another very impressive performance from Celtic. We've been spoiled with the number of trebles we've won as a football club since Brendan came in the first time around. They are not easy to win. Knockout football, it just takes one thing happening in one game and you could be out on your arse. But for us, we've got a chance here again at doing a double, a chance at winning a cup that we tend to win more often than not, and we've got a chance to do it against our biggest rivals. And I'm really looking forward to it. I think it'll be a really good game of football. I think both teams will give it a good go. Hopefully we get a nice sunny day for it. And as I said at the start of the show, I'm relatively confident and feeling like it won't just be a Celtic win. I think Celtic could end up giving them a bit of a doing if they turn up and play the way they want to. And as well as all that, Russell, there is the other element of this we've not really touched upon. Joe Hart obviously had his swan song at Celtic Park at the weekend. He's going to be desperate, is he not, to sign off with a Scottish Cup win against Rangers. What a way to finish your career that would be for him, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for him, yeah, definitely. From my point of view, I've done all that with him. I felt emotional watching him when we won the league. On the Wednesday, I've watched all his footage since that he carries so with dignity, class, real emotion, how much someone could fall in love. To me, though, you've done that at Celtic Park now. You've got to go back to Henrik mode. There's no tears for Henrik when he won that Scottish Cup final 2004. I think that's the example you follow. Don't give a fuck. It's all about doing the business then. It's not about, it's a fairy tale for Henrik. Henrik never gave you that impression. He cried his eyes out, remember, at Celtic Park. Yeah. Joe Hart wasn't as bad as that, in fact. But I suppose he wasn't. It was quite as much of a legend.
He looked a bit wobbly at half time, though.
Yeah. No, I get that. He was all, listen, his emotion, I thought he came over brilliant.
Uh-huh.
But to me, I get the business head back on. You start looking at Henrik and you go, there's the levels. You have that self-indulgence. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's not self-indulgence in a negative way. It was self-indulgence that was put in front of him and he lapped it up and he absolutely deserved that moment, by the way. Absolutely deserved it. So there's nothing negative in what I'm saying. Once he gets back to Hampden the week after, last game or not, that's out the window. It's about delivering outcomes, winning trophies. You go Henrik mode. That's what you do. And Henrik never cried that Scottish Cup. Never looked like anything about that. It was now back to business. He's left home, as far as I'm concerned, Joe Hart. He's moved away from home now. It's now over at Hampden, and the reason that you're so upset about leaving Celtic is because you're going to miss winning trophies. Go win another one. Let's get the serious hat on now. We've done all that. It's done. So I will
put
not
on his Instagram though as well, didn't he? Let's get down to business. Is how he signed off on Instagram. He signed off his Instagram with "Let's get down to business." So I think mentally, I think he will be there. Yeah,
it's the absolute only way. You've had that moment in the sun, the moment in the sun at Celtic Park, where the league was already won. You can have the luxury of having a half-time thing like that, getting subbed off, all that. Jonathan, I don't have any romance towards Joe Hart now for the final. I might after the game. I can't bring myself to even care about that right now when it comes in cup final terms. I can't every other term, but cup final terms, I always go back to that. Henrik he changed the way you thought about footballers because he had you through the mire of how much he was upset visually, which you'd never seen him before. And when it came to the cup final, it was all gone. It was utter ruthless for the King of Kings then. Didn't matter to play for Celtic. It was about delivering outcomes, winning trophies, scoring goals, doing what he does. And ironically, in that game, I think Dunfermline, I was at the game in the Dunfermline end, and they had the cheek. That was only because it was the only way I could get a ticket, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. And they had the cheek to score first, which obviously pissed them off even more. But that's all I want from Joe Hart, to be honest with you. If he cries after it, I might be back in the same zone as him. But I always remember Henrik's reaction after that game, and funnily enough, the tears were all dried up by then. He was back to being a serial winner. Joe Hart's career will be laced with trophy laden and laced with trophies throughout his spells in the different clubs. And I just feel that the romance bit's over now. We enjoyed that Saturday. It's not about that anymore for me.
No, I'd agree. I think he's one of those guys. I think he's very much a model professional. He's shown it in the few years he's been up with us. He's another one that's not really came in a Celtic fan, but he's absolutely going to be leaving as one. I wouldn't be surprised if he's somebody that does make a regular trip up to Celtic Park for big games going forward. And we welcome, with open arms with what he's given the club over the past few years. He's been a very steady head. And again, he was probably a very important figure in the background, I would suspect, this season, because again, he's one of those guys with that noose and knows how to get over the line in title races, both north and indeed south of the border when they've gone right to the wire. Somebody like a Joe Hart in that changing room would have been huge for Brendan. And I think when it comes to the cup final, as long as he's not hitting any penalties, I think we should be all right. And hopefully,
if it does go to penalties, which I think it could. Would he?
Yeah, good. I mean, I think you'd have the ball. I think you'd have the balls to. Yeah,
I think he's in the top five. I think. I know people think this is mad, but if I'm consistent with my argument about Rodgers being able to remove emotion from decisions, then I think he's rated as in the top 5 penalty takers at Celtic.
Yeah. Well, as I say, he was
out of those who fancy it. If it went to penalties. If it went Stephen Kennedy, Bhoycie, it won't go to penalties. Big Mystic Megs, Mr. Kennedy.
Well, forget one in normal time. Maybe he might fancy one in normal time. We're running out of penalty takers. He must be close to the front on that front as well.
Oh, fuck. I don't think I could handle that. I mean, fuck, if he scores, it's a moment in time. But if the game's tight, I mean, if we're 3-0 up and but I don't think he would, because I don't think he takes sentiment and emotion in the decisions he makes, Rodgers. I think he was in the top 5 penalty takers for a reason. Football related, I really do. It just doesn't look like that. The optics don't share that always. But I do think that. But it will be an interesting week ahead. We know how the build-up will go. By Friday, Rangers will be probably, to the media, not to the bookies, but they'll be the favourites. We know that will turn by Friday, that there'll be some sort of disaster. Half of our team will be getting sold. Rodgers is probably unsettled. Celtic probably aren't as rich as he thought. They're probably due money out left, right, and centre for certain things. It'll just there'll be narratives getting ramped up. Jonathan, we expect all this nonsense, but who cares? Yeah. It's all big in your name in that trophy. Celtic's name in the trophy. And hopefully then Joe Hart with a medal. And he can put his name on his medal as an additive to that. But yeah, enjoyed the chat tonight, mate. Appreciate it. And thanks to everyone in the chat as well, because the live chat has been extremely busy. Again, we've been very consistent on a minimum of 4 shows a week. On the bus, a minimum of that. If you actually look over the last sort of 6 months, it's probably another 100 odd shows, if not way more than that, in the bank. We continually provide consistent shows on a level that no other who has no one professional doing this does. This is something that's very much a hobby on top of our jobs, fun on top of our jobs, and try to build a wee community to talk Celtic with. That's all we've tried to do for the get-go. Cause a bit of mischief, have some good chats about the football and the team that we love. That's what it's all about. And that's how it'll continue. And if I decide to put my camera on, that's because I decide to. If I decide we do the Monday Club on a Tuesday, that's because I'll decide to. And if Jonathan decides he's going to be late because he's eating chicken nuggets, he'll decide to. It's all good. I don't live a scheduled, structured lifestyle. It's not how it's ever going to roll on the bus. The bus may take a few crashes along the way, but it will certainly be driving in to see the Celts lift up the Scottish Cup. We will be there. Jonathan, thanks very much for coming on.
Excellent. Yeah, it's been good. It's been good to be back on. It's been a while.
I know it has, mate. Right, we'll see you all later. Cheers.